I, 32M, grew up in a household where money and appearances were everything. My parents were obsessed with material possessions and social status, but they never cared about actually being good parents or creating a loving family environment. They were selfish and only focused on their own wants and needs. From my earliest memories, I felt like an afterthought in my own home. My parents' relationship was chaotic at best. They'd have explosive arguments followed by extravagant makeup gifts to each other. I'd hide in my room during their fights, covering my ears to block out the shouting. When things were calm, they'd ignore each other and me. My mother came from old money, but had been cut off by her family for reasons I never fully understood. She resented this, and was determined to prove she could be even wealthier on her own. My father was from a working-class background, and had a chip on his shoulder about it. He was always trying to show he belonged in high society. Together they were a toxic combination of status-seeking and materialism. Growing up, I never had what I needed. My clothes were always old and worn out because my parents thought spending money on kids' clothes was a waste. I rarely got new school supplies. I'd have to make do with leftover pencil stubs and half-used notebooks. We lived in a big house in an upscale neighborhood, but my room was basically empty except for a bed and a desk I found on the curb. Meanwhile, my parents constantly bought new cars, designer clothes, and went on expensive vacations, usually without me. I started working part-time jobs when I was 14, lying about my age to get hired. My first job was at a local grocery store, stocking shelves after school and on weekends. By 16, I was working 30-plus hours a week while going to school full-time. I had jobs at fast food restaurants, as a gas station attendant, mowing lawns, anything I could find. My parents took most of my paychecks, claiming it was for rent and to teach me responsibility. But I knew they were just using me to fund their lifestyle. The rest of our family couldn't stand my parents. My mother's parents had disowned her years ago. My father's family, while not wealthy, were kind, hard-working people who were disgusted by how my parents behaved. My aunts, uncles, and cousins on both sides slowly cut contact over the years. Even my paternal grandparents, who lived nearby, rarely visited. I found out later it was because they couldn't bear to see how I was being treated. I have memories of birthdays where no one showed up because my parents hadn't bothered to invite anyone, or had actively discouraged people from coming because they didn't want to waste money on a kid's party. One year, when I turned 12, I got up excited for my birthday only to find the house empty. My parents had gone on a weekend trip and forgotten it was my birthday entirely. I spent the day alone, heating up a frozen dinner and watching TV. Christmases were no better. I'd get nothing or maybe one small, cheap gift, while my parents exchanged expensive jewelry, electronics, and designer items. One Christmas, when I was 9, I got a used coloring book, with half the pages already colored, and a broken toy car my dad had found in his office. Meanwhile, my mom unwrapped a diamond necklace, and my dad got a new Rolex. I was often left home alone for days at a time, starting when I was about 12, so they could go on trips. They'd leave some money for pizza and tell me not to answer the door or phone. I'd spend these days in constant anxiety, jumping at every noise and worrying about what would happen if there was an emergency. School was a challenge because my parents couldn't be bothered with any part of it. I had to forge their signatures on permission slips and report cards. Parent-teacher conferences would come and go without them showing up. When I needed help with homework, I was on my own. Despite this, I managed to do well in school. It was my escape, in a way. Teachers were often the only adults who showed any interest in my well-being. There was never any physical abuse, but the emotional neglect was constant. My parents would criticize everything about me: my appearance, my interests, my friends, on the rare occasions I was allowed to have friends over. Nothing was ever good enough. They'd compare me unfavorably to the children of their wealthy friends, asking why I couldn't be more like them. As soon as I turned 18, I left and never looked back. I'd been planning my escape for years, saving every penny I could hide from my parents. I put myself through college working multiple jobs. It was hard, but still better than living with them. I went completely no contact, changed my number, moved across the country, the works. I heard through extended family that they barely noticed I was gone. Over the past 14 years, I've built a good life for myself. I have a successful career in software development, a modest but comfortable house and some savings. All the things my parents prioritized, but I earned them honestly. I also have close friends who are like family to me. I've done a lot of work in therapy to process my childhood and learn to form healthy relationships. I thought I'd put all the drama with my parents behind me. Then last week, I got a call from my grandmother, my dad's mom. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd managed to track me down. My grandfather had passed away recently. Apparently, he'd left me a significant inheritance, a trust fund he'd been putting money into for me since I was born. He must have seen how my parents were and wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of. I was touched that my grandfather had thought of me, even though we weren't close. The inheritance isn't life-changing, but it's a nice nest egg that will help secure my future. I told my grandmother I was grateful, and we had a good conversation catching up after all these years. She filled me in on some family news and apologized for not doing more when I was younger. It was a bittersweet conversation, but overall positive. Somehow, my parents found out about the inheritance. Now they're blowing up my phone demanding that I give them the money. They're saying I owe them for raising me, and that they deserve compensation for being my parents. They're threatening to sue me if I don't hand it over. I'm furious. They were terrible parents who neglected and exploited me. Now they think they're entitled to money that my grandfather left specifically for me? No way. I told them to pound sand and blocked their numbers again. But I'm worried they might actually try to take legal action. Can they really sue me for this? Do I need to get a lawyer? I don't want to give them a penny, but I also don't want to get dragged into a long legal battle. Any advice on how to handle this would be appreciated. Update 1. Thanks for all the supportive comments on my last post. A lot has happened in the past couple weeks, so I wanted to give an update. First, I took the advice many of you gave and consulted with a lawyer. He assured me that my parents have absolutely no legal claim to my inheritance. The trust was set up solely in my name by my grandfather, so it's 100% mine. My lawyer sent my parents a strongly worded cease and desist letter telling them to back off. Unfortunately, that didn't stop them. A few days after my lawyer sent the letter, I was served with actual lawsuit papers. My parents are suing me for parental support and trying to claim my inheritance as repayment for raising me. The lawsuit is full of lies about how they supposedly sacrificed everything for me and how ungrateful I am. Reading through their claims brought back a lot of painful memories I'd tried to forget, like the time when I was 10 and broke my arm falling off my bike. I'd been riding alone because my parents never taught me or bought me safety gear. When I came home crying, my mom yelled at me for interrupting her TV show. My parents refused to take me to the doctor because they had tickets to a concert that night. I ended up having to call my friend's mom to take me to the ER. My parents were furious about the medical bill and grounded me for a month for being careless. There were so many instances of neglect and emotional abuse. Times they forgot to pick me up from school and I had to walk miles home. I remember one winter evening when I was 13, waiting outside the school for hours in the freezing cold. When I finally got home, blue-lipped and shivering, my parents were hosting a dinner party and told me to go to my room so I wouldn't bother the guests. The lawsuit also brought up memories of the screaming fights where they'd tell me I was worthless and they wished I'd never been born. Anytime I did something they didn't like, got a B on a test, forgot to do a chore, or even just expressed an opinion they disagreed with, it would trigger a lecture about how I was a disappointment and a burden. There was constant criticism about my appearance, my grades, everything. Nothing was ever good enough for them. I remember when I was 16, I saved up for months to buy a guitar. Music was my passion and my escape. The day I brought it home, my father smashed it to pieces, saying I was wasting my time on silly hobbies instead of focusing on getting into an Ivy League school. One particularly vivid memory their lawsuit brought up was my high school graduation. I'd worked so hard to graduate with honors despite everything. My parents didn't even show up to the ceremony. They were on a shopping trip in New York. When I got home that night, the house was empty except for a note saying, "Congrats, we're in the Hamptons for the weekend. Don't throw any parties." That was the moment I knew I had to get out as soon as I turned 18. Anyway, my lawyer says their lawsuit is frivolous and will almost certainly get thrown out. But we still have to go through the motions of responding, and potentially even appearing in court. It's stressful and bringing up a lot of old trauma, but I'm determined not to let them manipulate or bully me anymore. I've also been in contact more with my grandmother. She's furious at my parents for this and has offered to testify on my behalf if needed about how they treated me growing up. It's nice to have some family on my side for once. She's been sharing stories about my grandfather and how he always worried about me. Apparently, he tried to intervene a few times when I was younger, but my parents threatened to cut off all contact if he interfered. So he started the trust fund in secret, hoping it would help me someday. That's where things stand for now. I'll post another update once there are new developments with the lawsuit. Thanks again for all the support. It really means a lot after feeling alone with this for so long. Update 2. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update on the situation with my parents and the inheritance lawsuit. We had our first court appearance last week. It was just a preliminary hearing, but it was still incredibly stressful. Seeing my parents in person for the first time in 14 years brought up a lot of emotions. They looked older, of course, but still had that same entitled, arrogant attitude. My mother was dripping in expensive jewelry, and my father was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. Their lawyer tried to paint this picture of devoted parents who sacrificed everything for their child, only to be cruelly abandoned. It was infuriating to hear such blatant lies. They claimed they had given me a loving home, paid for the best schools, and supported all my endeavors. In reality, I went to public school, and they never came to a single school event. They talked about family vacations that never happened, and hobbies they had encouraged, when in fact, they had actively discouraged any interests I had. My lawyer did a great job countering their claims, though. He presented evidence of my work history starting at age 14, school records showing my parents' lack of involvement, and even some old medical records documenting injuries and illnesses that went untreated. He had statements from some of my old teachers about how they had tried to contact my parents multiple times about concerns for my well-being, but never got any response. One piece of evidence that seemed to really impact the judge was my high school yearbook. In the parent dedication section, where most kids had heartfelt messages from their parents, mine was blank. My lawyer pointed out that this was because my parents hadn't even responded to multiple requests from the yearbook committee. The judge seemed skeptical of my parents' case from the start. She asked them pointed questions about why they never reported me as a runaway if I'd truly abandoned them at 18. She also wanted to know why they'd made no effort to contact me in 14 years if they cared so much. My parents fumbled their answers, contradicting each other and getting defensive. My mother claimed she had tried to call me many times. A lie. I would have known if she had. My father said he thought I needed space to grow up and didn't want to interfere with my life. It was almost satisfying to see them squirm. Almost. Mostly, it just made me sad to see how pathetic they really are. The most dramatic moment came when my grandmother testified. She described in detail how my parents had neglected me, how she'd tried to intervene, but they'd shut her out. She talked about times she'd come over to find me alone as a small child, unfed and unwashed. About how my parents would pawn me off on relatives for weeks at a time to go on trips. How they'd blow off my school events and extracurriculars. She recounted one incident when I was about 7. My parents had left me with her for a weekend, which turned into a week, then 2 weeks. They were supposedly on a business trip, but my grandmother later found out they'd actually been on a luxury cruise. When they finally came to pick me up, they acted annoyed, as if caring for me had been a huge imposition on my grandmother. My mother actually tried to lunge at my grandmother, screaming that she was a liar. The bailiff had to restrain her. It was chaos. My father just sat there with a stony expression, not even trying to calm my mother down. The judge was not impressed and scolded my parents for their behavior. In the end, the judge said she'd review everything and issue a ruling soon on whether the case could proceed. But she strongly hinted that she was inclined to dismiss it. My lawyer is confident it will be thrown out. As stressful as the hearing was, I actually feel relieved. For so long I'd carried this fear that maybe I was wrong, maybe I'd misjudged my parents. Seeing them in court, hearing their lies, watching their masks slip, it validated everything I've felt all these years. They really are selfish, abusive people who never cared about me. I'm still processing a lot of emotions from the hearing. It brought up so many old memories and feelings. But I'm proud of myself for standing my ground and not letting them manipulate me. Whatever the judge decides, I know I'm doing the right thing by keeping them out of my life. I'll post a final update once we get the official ruling. Thanks again for all the support. It's really helped me stay strong through this. Update 3. Final update on the inheritance situation with my parents. The judge issued her ruling yesterday and, as expected, she dismissed my parents' lawsuit entirely. She called their claims frivolous and without merit, and even took the unusual step of ordering them to pay my legal fees. In her written opinion, the judge didn't hold back. She said there was overwhelming evidence that my parents had been neglectful at best and abusive at worst. She cited specific incidents from my childhood that came out during testimony, like the broken arm story and the times I was left alone for days. The judge also noted that my parents had made no effort to contact me for 14 years until money was involved. She said this showed their lawsuit was purely motivated by greed, not any genuine concern for me. She was particularly critical of their behavior in court, saying it demonstrated a continued pattern of putting their own interests above their child's well-being. My parents were in the courtroom when the ruling was read. My mom started sobbing dramatically while my dad just glared at me. I kept my composure, but inside I felt an enormous sense of relief and vindication. It was like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. As we were leaving the courthouse, my dad tried to approach me. For a moment, I thought maybe he was going to apologize. Instead, he hissed that I was ungrateful and that I'd regret this. He said something about how I'd come crawling back when I needed them. My lawyer quickly stepped between us and told my dad to back off. It was a stark reminder of why I've kept them out of my life all these years. They're incapable of taking responsibility for their actions or feeling genuine remorse. In their minds, they'll always be the victims. Even faced with a judge's ruling and mountains of evidence, they still can't admit they did anything wrong. I'm glad this ordeal is over, but I know it's not really the end. My parents will probably try to harass me again in the future if they think they can get money out of me. I'm going to talk to my lawyer about possibly getting a restraining order. Given their behavior in court and my dad's threatening comments, I think I have a good case for one. This whole experience has been draining, but also cathartic in a way. I've finally been able to tell my story and have it validated by a court of law. I don't have to carry around any doubt or guilt anymore. All those years of gaslighting and manipulation, it's like the fog has finally cleared. I've been thinking a lot about my grandfather since this all started. I wish I had gotten to know him better. My grandmother has been sharing more stories about him, and it seems like he was a good man who really cared about me. I'm grateful for the gift he left me, not just the money, but the knowledge that someone in my family was looking out for me all along. For now, I'm just focusing on moving forward. I'm going to take some time to relax and process everything. My friends have been incredibly supportive throughout this whole ordeal, and we're planning a small celebration dinner this weekend. It feels good to have people in my life who genuinely care about me. I'm thinking about using some of the inheritance to take a nice vacation, my first real vacation ever. Somewhere tropical where I can sit on a beach and not think about family drama for a while. Maybe I'll finally learn to surf or try scuba diving. I want to start making positive memories to balance out all the negative ones from my childhood. Long term, I'm considering using some of the money to start a small foundation to help kids in similar situations to what I went through. Maybe a scholarship fund for teens who are putting themselves through school or support for programs that help neglected kids. It's just an idea at this point, but I like the thought of turning this negative situation into something positive for others. I know I still have a lot of healing to do. This lawsuit brought up a lot of old wounds, but I also feel stronger for having gone through it and come out the other side. I stood up to my parents, told my truth, and was believed. That means more than any inheritance ever could. Thank you all again for the support throughout this crazy situation. It's meant more than you know. Your comments and advice helped me stay strong when things got tough. I'm looking forward to putting this behind me and focusing on the positive things in my life. Here's to new beginnings and chosen families.